Hello everyone, and welcome to Voices Behind Reddit. Here we bring you the best stories from Reddit where real experiences and captivating tales come to life. Let's get started.
Wife cheats, sends husband to jail, then he sends a shocking gift that made her scream. Imagine spending years with someone you trust, building a life together, only to find out they've been unfaithful, not once, but with several people. That's where Mike found himself, his whole world crashing down after discovering that his wife, Sara, had been seeing multiple colleagues behind his back. But as if her betrayal wasn't enough, the court sided with Sara. She got spousal support, child support, and Mike was still responsible for paying the mortgage on their shared home, the same home where her affairs had taken place. It was like he was being punished while she was rewarded. Angry and heartbroken, Mike didn't sit quietly. He found a way to make a point. Each spousal support payment came in coins, delivered right to her door by an armored truck. It was inconvenient and messy, but for Mike, it was a reminder that he wasn't going to take this quietly. Yet, the court battles got uglier, and eventually, Mike ended up in jail after a heated courtroom exchange. Behind bars, he was forced to reflect on the life he'd led, on Sara's choices, and on the cost of trusting the wrong person. It was a harsh reality, but one he was determined to endure. The court decision. After Sara's affair came to light, Mike hoped for some fairness in court. He was prepared to negotiate, to make things work for the sake of their daughter, Lucy, if nothing else. But as the courtroom drama unfolded, it felt like each decision was a slap in the face. The judge ruled in Sara's favor, and it didn't just feel unfair, it was devastating. She was awarded spousal support, even though she had a high-paying job. She also received child support, despite her betrayal, and to top it off, Mike was ordered to keep paying the mortgage on their family home. The same home that held countless memories for him, now tainted by her actions. For Mike, this wasn't just about money. Every dollar, every court order felt like a painful reminder that Sara's choices hadn't come with consequences, at least not for her. Instead, it was he who was left scrambling, forced to pick up the pieces of a life he no longer recognized. But Mike wasn't someone who could just let things go. He began to think of ways to meet his obligations while still making his feelings known. That's when he came up with an idea that was part protest, part personal therapy. He would send Sara her support payments in coins, not just a few, but enough coins to fill an armored truck. The message was clear. He would meet his obligations, but he wouldn't make it easy on her. Every month, Sara had to deal with massive deliveries, stacks of coins arriving on her doorstep, loud and heavy, making her life just a bit more inconvenient. It was petty, yes, but for Mike, it was a small victory, a moment of control in a situation that had taken almost everything from him. Yet, as he'd soon find out, these battles would cost him more than he could ever imagine. Life after divorce. Once the court rulings were finalized, Mike's life shifted drastically. He was now left with hefty monthly payments to cover, spousal support, child support, and a mortgage on a house he no longer even called home. Each month, he watched his bank balance drop, wondering how he was supposed to keep going under the weight of it all. But it wasn't just the money, it was the feeling of loss, of being stripped of everything he'd once held close. His marriage, his family life, even his sense of stability, they all seemed to be slipping further away with each passing day. And yet, as down as he felt, something inside him just wouldn't quit. That's when he decided to get a little creative. If he had to pay, he'd pay, but he would do it in a way that made his voice heard. Every month, he made sure the payments were delivered in coins, a small act of defiance wrapped in heavy metal. To him, those coins symbolized his struggle, a reminder that he was still here, still fighting, even if in the smallest of ways. Each time an armored truck rolled up to Sara's driveway, spilling out buckets of coins, it brought a faint smile to his face. It wasn't about hurting her. It was about making sure he didn't lose his own sense of dignity in the process. He may have lost his marriage, his home, and even his pride, but he was determined not to let go of his spirit. But Mike soon realized that his small acts of resistance came at a price. His friends grew distant, his social circle became smaller, and bit by bit, he felt isolated. Sara's friends and family painted him as bitter, unable to let go, and it stung. As much as he tried to brush it off, Each comment, each sideways glance, reminded him of what he'd lost and how much further he had to go. Through all of this, his one bright spot was his daughter, Lucy. Though they couldn't see each other as often, her phone calls, her little messages kept him going. Every word she shared gave him a reason to keep pushing, a reminder that there was still love left in his life, even if it came with miles of separation. And so Mike pressed on, enduring the weight of his obligations, one coin payment at a time, knowing that somewhere down the line things had to get better. Or, at least he hoped they would. Unjust imprisonment. As if the divorce hadn't already pushed Mike to his limits, things took a darker turn. One heated day in court, after another back and forth with Sara's lawyer, Mike's frustration got the better of him. He voiced his anger a little too loudly, a little too honestly. It was enough to land him in jail, a punishment that felt like the ultimate betrayal. Being locked up was a world he'd never imagined for himself. The daily routines, the harsh conditions, the constant feeling of vulnerability, every moment in that cell tested him. He was stripped of his freedom and his dignity and left with only his thoughts. The days blurred together, but the pain of what he'd lost was sharp and relentless. But prison also brought unexpected clarity. With nothing but time to reflect, Mike thought about Sara, about all those years he'd invested in their life together, and about Lucy, his daughter who he missed more than anything. He realized that he'd been carrying this weight of anger and bitterness, not just from the divorce, but from years of feeling unseen and unappreciated. In those quiet, lonely hours, he began to understand that his survival now depended not on revenge, but on finding some peace within himself. He held on to the memories of Lucy's visits, her letters that managed to reach him even behind bars. She'd share little updates, talk about school and her dreams, and always tell him to stay strong. Her words, though simple, were the lifeline he needed to get through the long days. With every letter, every visit, he found a bit of his hope returning. Lucy was growing into a strong, independent young woman, despite everything, and he realized that his role now was to make it through this, to be there for her when he got out. He couldn't change the past, couldn't take back the years he'd given to someone who didn't deserve them, but he could focus on building a future with his daughter. Lucy's struggles. While Mike was battling his own hardships, Lucy was quietly facing her own struggles. She was caught between her parents, trying to make sense of a world where everything familiar was being ripped apart. Her mom, Sara, seemed more focused on her new life and social circle than on the well-being of her daughter. It left Lucy feeling lost, isolated and torn. She missed her dad terribly. Despite everything she'd heard from her mom's side, Lucy couldn't shake the memories of the dad she knew, the one who'd read her stories before bed, helped her with school projects, and always made her feel safe. To her, he wasn't the bitter, difficult man that some tried to paint him as. He was her dad, someone she knew loved her deeply. As she watched her mom move on so easily, marrying someone else without a second thought, Lucy began to question her place in all of this. She felt like a background character in her mother's new story, a silent observer as Sara pursued her own happiness, leaving the family's broken pieces in her wake. It was around this time that Lucy made a difficult decision. She wanted to live more independently, to find stability that neither her mom nor the court decisions had been able to give her. She started working part-time, saving up, and eventually took legal steps to have more control over her own life. The choice wasn't easy, but it allowed Lucy to reconnect with Mike, who had become her anchor in this storm. She began visiting him regularly, each visit building a bridge between them that grew stronger over time. Lucy was no longer just a daughter dealing with a broken family. She was becoming a young adult, learning how to stand up for herself and finding her own strength. In a way, Lucy's decision to step out on her own brought healing, not just for her, but for Mike too. Their relationship grew into something deeper, built on shared resilience and a renewed sense of family. Together, they started dreaming of a fresh start, one where they could build a life free from the shadows of the past. Father-daughter bond. In the midst of all the turmoil, Mike and Lucy's bond became the foundation that kept them both steady. Every visit to see her dad was a chance for Lucy to reconnect, and for Mike, each moment spent with her was like a breath of fresh air in the middle of his chaos. They'd sit across from each other, sharing stories, updates, and dreams of a future that felt far, but somehow still within reach. Over time, their conversations grew deeper. Mike started opening up about his experiences, his regrets, and the things he wished he'd done differently. He shared his hope that someday he could be the kind of father Lucy deserved. A strong, dependable figure who would be there for her no matter what. Lucy, in turn, found strength in those conversations. She realized that, despite everything he'd been through, her dad still believed in their future together. He encouraged her to follow her passions, to stand up for herself, and to never let anyone make her feel small. Each time he spoke, she felt more empowered, more certain of who she was and what she wanted from life. They even started making plans, dreaming about the life they'd build once Mike was finally free. It was a simple dream, an honest, quiet life where they could leave the pain and betrayal behind. They talked about a small house, maybe near a park or by the water, where they could spend time together, just father and daughter, healing and growing. Lucy's visits gave Mike purpose. In a world that had stripped away so much, she was his one unshakable reason to keep fighting. And as Lucy watched her dad slowly transform, rediscovering his sense of humor, finding small moments of hope, she saw the person she'd known all along, a man who wouldn't let bitterness or loss define him. Together, they built a bridge that could withstand any storm, a bond that gave them both the strength to face whatever came next. It was clear that they were moving towards something better, one step at a time. A new beginning. The day finally came when Mike walked out of prison, a free man. He stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the warmth of the sun, a freedom he'd longed for during all those lonely days. But this time he wasn't alone. Lucy was there, waiting for him, her face lit up with a smile that said everything words couldn't. As they hugged, Mike felt the weight of the past lift just a bit. This was a fresh start, one he wasn't sure he'd ever see, and it felt like the beginning of something better. Lucy had prepared a surprise for him, a symbol of their new beginning. She'd saved up, planned, and arranged for a small home where they could both rebuild. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, filled with the promise of a life unburdened by betrayal and resentment. Walking through the door of their new home, Mike couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The rooms were simple but cozy, each corner touched by Lucy's thoughtfulness. She put up a few of his favourite photos, small reminders of happier times, making sure he knew he was welcomed back into a life that mattered. They spent that first day together in the new house, talking, laughing, and planning their future. It was a new chapter, one where they could finally leave behind the shadows of the past. Mike had a lot to adjust to, but with Lucy by his side, he knew he had the strength to keep moving forward. Their lives were simpler now, focused on little joys, a morning coffee, a walk in the park, quiet conversations about hopes and dreams. They'd both learned so much through the pain, but now they had each other, and that was enough. Sarah's new marriage. While Mike and Lucy were building their new life, Sara had moved on in her own way. She'd remarried, choosing a wealthy partner who could offer her the lifestyle she'd always dreamed of. On the outside, it seemed like she'd won the battle, living in a big house, with all the luxury that money could buy. But beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. Her new husband was a man of status and success, but he was distant, cold, and always busy with his work. Sara quickly found herself in a life that was more about appearances than genuine connection. She traded a partner who cared deeply for her for someone who barely noticed her beyond the surface. Every lavish dinner, every designer gift reminded her of what she'd lost, a relationship that may have had its issues, but was filled with warmth and love. As days turned into months, Sara began to feel the weight of her choices. She was living a life that looked perfect in photos, but she couldn't shake the emptiness. She could feel the disconnect between herself and her new husband, a man who was more of a stranger than a partner. Her old life with Mike, flawed as it had been, felt more real, more honest. But by now, it was too late to turn back. For Sara, each day became a reminder that her choices had led her here. The freedom and happiness she thought she'd gain had turned into a gilded cage, trapping her in a life that felt hollow. It was a stark contrast to the simple, fulfilling life Mike was building with Lucy, a life filled with the love and connection that money simply couldn't buy. The shocking gift. With his new life taking shape, Mike wanted one final act to put the past to rest, a message to Sara that would be impossible to ignore. After years of dealing with betrayal, loss, and rebuilding himself from the ground up, he felt it was time to close the door on that chapter once and for all. So he came up with an idea, a gift box. It wasn't just any box, though. Inside was a collection of memories and messages that would strike at the very heart of their shared history. In it, he included photos from happier times, small notes they'd once exchanged, and even a few keepsakes from their life together. But there was a twist. Among these items were stark reminders of the choices Sara had made. He'd written a note that summed up everything he felt, a simple message: "You chose this." When Sara received the box, she opened it expecting something harmless, maybe even sentimental. But as she went through each item, a realization dawned. The photos, the notes, the memories, each one felt like a weight pulling her back into a past she had tried to brush aside. And then, as she read Mike's final words, a wave of regret and guilt flooded over her. She screamed, overwhelmed by the emotions that came rushing back, a mixture of anger, sorrow, and shame. In that single moment, she felt the full impact of her decisions. It wasn't just about the money, the luxury, or the lifestyle she'd pursued. It was about the people she'd left behind, the real love she'd traded for a life that now felt empty. For Mike, it wasn't about revenge. It was about letting go, freeing himself from the weight of the past. And with that final gesture, he could finally move forward, closing the book on a story that had once defined him, but no longer held him captive. Conclusion. With that final gesture, Mike was free, not just in the physical sense, but in every way that mattered. He had walked through the fire of betrayal, injustice, and loss, only to emerge stronger, more at peace with himself and the life he was creating. What had once been a painful chapter now felt like a story from someone else's life, one that he could finally close for good. Now, his days were filled with the little moments that mattered most. He and Lucy spent time together, working on the house, sharing meals, and talking about everything and nothing at all. Each day brought a simple joy that was richer than any luxury or big house could offer. For the first time, Mike felt whole, with a heart free from anger and a mind focused on what truly counted. As for Sara, she was left with her own choices and the life she'd built around them. No more words from Mike, no more battles. Just silence, and the weight of realizing what she'd traded away. In the end, this wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about finding peace, letting go, and moving on. Mike had learned that sometimes life doesn't hand out perfect justice, but it can still offer second chances. He found his second chance not in some grand triumph, but in the quiet, unassuming moments shared with his daughter. And as the sun set each day, Mike knew that he'd won, not in court, not with coins, but with a life that was finally his own, filled with love, hope, and the promise of better days.